Well, it's wonderful to be with you all this morning, and I'm feeling uplifted by our fellowship and just the spirit that I felt in your prayers and testimonies and the words that our brother Cliff shared this morning. And I know Sister Joyce and others. We're trying to keep our internet going while it's snowing and blowing outside, and sometimes it's a spotty signal. But even though we may not have uh, a reliable Zoom, the connection of the Lord is still uniting us. And Brother Cliff, I'll tell you, you had said you were a bit surprised by where you felt the Lord leading you today in the scriptures, and yet I think what I have aligns very closely. And so there's a couple of things that you mentioned um, that I would like to build upon. And what you were speaking of to us today about the plan of man and the plan of God. That's really my subject. And so I wanted to begin with a couple of verses. And these are found in the Book of Mormon. In the second book of Nephi, the 9th chapter. And I'll start just in the 28th verse here. But it says, "Oh, that cunning plan of the evil one. Oh, the vainness and the frailties and the foolishness of men. When they think they are learned, they think they are wise, and they hearken not to the counsel of God, for they set it aside, supposing they know of themselves, wherefore their wisdom is foolishness, and it profiteth them not." And I think of the example we heard this morning of King Noah and how he thought that he had a way laid out. And yet, within that same chapter, in the 13th verse, it talks about a different plan. And here it says, "Oh, how great the plan of our God. For on the other hand, the paradise of God must deliver up the spirits of the righteous, and the grave deliver up the body of the righteous, and the spirit and the body is restored to itself again, and all men become incorruptible and immortal, and they are living souls, having a perfect knowledge like unto us in the flesh, save it be that our knowledge shall be perfect." So two plans laid out here in this same chapter, and one good and one bad. And I would ask you today, does that sound familiar? Do you see that there is a plan of the world and a plan of God before us? And here we are in the midst of these options and a choice that we have to make between those two. And make no mistake, the plan of the world, the plan of the evil one that we just heard about in that scripture, is against the plan of God. And so not only do we have two plans before us today, but they work against each other. And so, I too thought it's somewhat curious as I felt the Lord leading us to speak about the resurrection today. I mean, here I see that Brother Cliff was talking about almost a very similar message in a different part of the Book of Mormon, speaking about the resurrection. And, this is the plan of God. And I think when we try to wrap our minds around something as grandiose as the resurrection, we struggle to understand that. And yet it does help us, I hope, to kind of remove our focus a little bit from the things that are going on in the world, and to understand that while they may seem overwhelming and consuming, that there's something so much greater that God has in store. And really what we're dealing with pales in comparison to the great plan of God, just like it says, here in that 13th verse. And it is helpful, not that I would want for any of us to suffer. And when I don't feel well in the flesh, I don't function. I don't really have a lot of strength or focus. I'm consumed by the issue I'm facing. But I also know that it's temporary. the pains of life come and go, this body comes and goes, but the spirit moves on, and then the body comes back. That's the plan of the resurrection, the plan of God, and it is something of great and mighty significance today. But what I wanted to kind of go from here and talk about is that if we have these two plans before us, and we want to be sure that we're on the right side, that we're following the plan of God and not the plan of the world, then how do we go about that? And that's really where I wanted to build upon today. And I'll tell you this, that it's only going to get worse. The conflict between these two plans is just going to increase. And because of that, it's all the more imperative that we are firmly planted in the path that leads us to God's plan. And so we're going to need to become accustomed, I would say, to being in the minority. Because although everyone around us might be fine with choosing the plan of God, of man's wisdom, the plan of sin, the plan of the world, we know that that will not end well and that we cannot partake of it. And so we're going to need the fortitude, I think, somehow through the understanding given us by the Spirit and Word of God to plant our feet firmly in the right side, the plan that God has for us. And so I wanted to share some scriptures and thoughts about how we might zero in and set our sights upon the Lord and be unmoved by the turmoil in the world as it increases. And these are the kinds of things I think that we need to feed upon, that we need to nurture our souls with, that we might be able to withstand the opposition that we have and be able to stay the course, even though there may not be anyone on our right or our left some days that seems to be doing the same. And so, it says, it gives us a few tips in the scriptures. It says this in Isaiah 26:3, thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee, because he trusteth in thee. And, I guess somewhat here, what we have to do is recognize that if I have a plan to serve God, my way of doing that is probably not perfect. I'm trying to pick the perfect aim, the goal in life, but my way in getting there is sometimes not quite right. And so not only do we have to be wary of the plans of the evil one, but also wary of our own plans and our own wisdom and understanding, and be willing to adjust the plan as we go, and be willing to follow the corrections, the course corrections that God gives us along the way. Because I know this, that while I'm not always sure of what will happen between now and then, it's my utmost goal to be sure that I end up with the Lord. And so I have to be willing sometimes to surrender my methods and submit to God's will. And it says this too in the New Testament, in Philippians 4:7, it says, and the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, shall keep our hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. And so as we put our trust in the Lord, as we direct our thoughts to him, he gives us peace, and these things reinforce us. And that's also a beautiful point Brother Cliff made this morning. How do we stay the course? How do we strengthen ourselves in our path with the Lord? And it talks again in Psalms about peace. And again, I think that's a wonderful message for us in a day of conflict. Sister Joyce was mentioning the news and the things that are happening, that we, in contrast with that, would have peace somehow. And these are the promises and the way that the Lord has laid out for us. And in Psalms 119, 165, it says, great peace have they which love thy law, and nothing shall offend them. And so these are some pieces of guidance for us. And when it says nothing shall offend them, many translations read that as nothing will cause them to stumble. And so whether it be an offense, whether it be a fear, whether it be something that's worrying us, whatever it might be, the Lord has a way around that, and we have to not get stuck. We have to not spin on those things. We've got to move on in the Lord. And so if we have this great peace God is offering us and love his law and trust in him, then we can overcome the stumbling blocks that would get in our way. And, we often talk about this, this scripture about the brother of Jared. And, here he was, this great man of faith, and he had a great work. God had a plan for him, right? He had a plan that he would venture out from the Tower of Babel and form a new place, a new people, make a great migration. And, it was a great plan. And when we started this morning, I read you that verse of how it says, "Oh, the great plan of God." And I would ask you this today: does anyone feel a little bit daunted by God's plan? Is it sometimes a little too great? And we think, Lord, that sounds good and all, but it's a bit much for me. And I would just ask you, I'm not going to go through the parts of this story that we normally talk about. I just want to talk about the moment before the migration that the Jaredites took. And I have talked about it before in other sermons and classes, but I wanted to bring yet something new out in this message, because I would say, I'll just start in the 13th verse here. It says, "And now I proceed with my record." This is Ether 2, by the way. And it says, "For behold, it came to pass that the Lord did bring Jared and his brethren forth, even to that great sea which divideth the lands. And as they came to the sea, they pitched their tents, and they called the name of the place Moriancumer, and they dwelt in tents upon the seashore for the space of 4 years." And I guess I would say today that we're living in Moriancumer. It's a place of comfort, and yet maybe a place of complacency. It's a place where maybe we've had many of the prosperous blessings of life, and yet the Lord's saying, "I need you to get in the boat and leave that behind." And, isn't that a type and shadow of our spiritual lives? That we could find ourselves comfortable in life with everything that we need in the moment. But often the Lord is saying, "I want you to step out on faith, and I want you to move forward into something greater, because I have a plan." And I would say that in that moment, they paused, they stopped praying, they hid from God, and they just stayed put for 4 years. The brother of Jared was avoiding God's plan, and no wonder. How would you feel about getting into a dark boat for a year without a sail and being dashed upon by the waves, crossing the ocean to a place you've never been? And, this was a daunting idea for them. And so they kind of ran the other way from the Lord. And it says in the 14th verse, "It came to pass that at the end of the 4 years, the Lord came again unto the brother of Jared, and stood in a cloud and talked with him. And for the space of 3 hours did the Lord talk with the brother of Jared, and chastened him, because he remembered not to call upon the name of the Lord." Now I'm making a little bit of a leap here, and I'm supposing that it wasn't just that he didn't remember, he was avoiding God. He was a little scared about what was going to come next. They had reached the sea, and he's like, "Lord, what do you have in mind here? I'm not so sure about it. This is a really nice spot. Can we just, hunker down here?" And I can relate to that feeling right now in this day and time. Lord, I see that we're coming to a precipice, that great change is in the wind, but I've got a nice warm home here, and I just as soon stay put. And I don't know literally what the plan of God will unfold before us and how that will work. But I know this, that the Lord doesn't want us to stay where we are spiritually. He wants us to journey forth. And he says in the 15th verse, the brother of Jared repented of the evil which he had done and did call upon the name of the Lord for his brethren who were with him. And the Lord said unto him, I will forgive thee and thy brethren of their sins, but thou shalt not sin any more. For ye shall remember that my spirit will not always strive with man. Wherefore, if ye will sin until ye are fully ripe, ye shall be cut off from the presence of the Lord. And these are my thoughts upon the land which I shall give you for your inheritance, for it shall be a land choice above all other lands. Now, when it says that the spirit will not always strive with man, I think, what would have happened if the Lord never came to chastise the brother of Jared? Would he have just continued on in the habit of complacency? And as a result, would we not have the hope of looking forward to the Jaredite record? What would have been the consequences if God hadn't intervened? And can I ask you the same about today? What would happen to our world, our society, our country, if the world keeps going in its course and God doesn't intervene? And so we ask ourselves many times, why, in so many words, why does God's plan have to be so great? Because I'm kind of little and small in comparison, and it's difficult for me to understand something so great. And, in that moment, the brother of Jared and the people with him, they had to step out on faith in such a great way. And they had to leave something that they liked behind. But it says in doing so that they would receive an inheritance from God, a land above all other lands, not just something better than what they had, but something better than what everyone had. And isn't that exactly what we're in the position of today? That we're looking ahead to a time in which God would want to restore his full will, his full plan for all of humanity, that we might be able to even, I said this in our Friday night class, what God is restoring is he's trying to bring us back to the conditions of Eden. He's trying to lift, in many ways, the curse that has been upon us since the days of Adam. If that's not a great message that stirs upon our hearts, I don't know what will. It's a time that never has before been experienced by any people since the fall of man. And so it is a great plan. And there's a great plan of opposition today too. And so I wanted to share this this experience in this verse with you, because I remember a few years back, Sister Benny Jones shared this experience, and she said that she was concerned about the church, and she was looking upon some of the struggles we were having. And she said, Lord, in questioning, why is this happening? And the Lord spoke to her and showed her that it's happening because the saints are not taking upon themselves all of the armor of God. And so as we look at this great plan and we question ourselves and say, how is it that I'm going to stay the course on such a great and mighty journey? It's by the power of God. It's by taking every resource God has offered us and equipping ourselves today. It's not going to be by saying, well, I see the word there on the shelf and that which it says, but I'm not going to pick it up and receive the strength required that I might make the journey. No, it's going to be by saying, I will receive and apply every resource at my disposal that God has made available. And he's given us many things. In fact, it talks about it in the scriptures, right? It says, in the book of Mormon, for example, this is 2 Nephi 1:23. He says, awake, my sons, and put on the armor of righteousness. Shake off the chains with which ye are bound, and come forth out of obscurity and arise from the dust. What a call to action. And how do we accomplish this? That we might be strengthened for the plan of God, strengthened for this great journey, like the Jaredites were when they crossed the ocean into a land like Canaan. Well, they dispensed with their lacking of faith and their sins, and they put on the armor of righteousness in its place, right? Because that's how it works. You can't have both. You can't follow both plans today. I always think about that. And then this memory comes to me of, being in middle school, and my math teacher had a skiing injury. And she said, well, what happened is one ski went that way and the other ski went that way, and, the rest. Well, that's how it is when we try to follow two paths at once. We've got to make our choice today, or we'll be injured. We've got to choose the right path and follow it with all of our strength. And of course, we know these scriptures that it talks about in the Bible, where it says, put on the armor of God. And why? It says, finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. And that's what we're talking about today, to be strong. And he said, and how? It says, put on the whole armor of God, not just the helmet, not just the sword, but all the pieces. And he says that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities. What does that mean? Well, we know that there are rulers of darkness. We know that there are philosophies, right? Ways of living. And sometimes we get sucked into that. And we become accustomed to the ways of the world. And we say, well, seems like in the moment it's working pretty well for them. Maybe I'll try it too. And we can often be deceived. And yet these are principles, philosophies, thinking standards that will lead us astray, lead us away from the Lord. And so we have to be careful. And he says we're fighting against spiritual wickedness in high places. And, I think of that and I think, well, that means there is spiritual power that I can't contend with without God's help. And I need to get away from those things and lean upon the Lord. And again, he exhorts us, he says, wherefore take unto you the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to withstand in the evil day. And we're in an evil day. And having done all to stand therefore. And then he begins, right, to list out the pieces of the armor. And I wonder, could we recite them by heart? I need to get better at this, that I might be more focused on understanding, well, what are exactly the resources God has given us to withstand the evil day? And just like the Book of Mormon, it says, similar words, right? It says, have our loins girt about with truth, and the breastplate of righteousness, the preparation of the gospel, faith, the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit. As these things take on sort of this analogy, they take shape of these pieces of armor, these tools God has given us. It's a beautiful analogy, and it comes to life. And with these things, it says we'll be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked. And so the Lord has laid out a way for us, and then he's given us the tools to make that way. And I'll leave you with this, and this also is building upon our brother Cliff's words this morning. It says this in the scriptures: pray always with all prayer and supplication in the Spirit, and watch thereunto with all perseverance and supplication for all saints. And for me, that utterance may be given unto me, that I may open my mouth boldly to make known the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in bonds, that therein I may speak boldly as I ought to speak. So the message here in these scriptures in Ephesians 6 which is where I was just reading about the armor and about this message of praying continually. These are laying out the resources, the armor of God, the things that he's equipped us with, that we might be able to do that which we could not otherwise, that we might be emboldened. And, part of the boldness Paul was asking for was the ability to speak as he ought. And how should we speak? Well, we should speak truth. We should speak about righteousness and love and power. And these are things that go against the ways of the world, against the plan that the enemy has. And I think we have to have our eyes wide open today and understand there is an enemy with a plan for our destruction. And we have to be wary of that and be able, by God's power, to avoid it. So may God bless you as we try to endeavor and go forth, and let us learn from the brother of Jared that we can't avoid God's plan, as scary as it might seem at times, and simply trust. As Walt said, we feel fragile sometimes in his prayer this morning. Boy, I relate to that. And as he said that, I pictured myself, this fragile being inside the hand of God. Because although I'm fragile, I'm made by a mighty God, and I'm in his hand. So long as I choose it, so long as I trust him and I put upon myself his armor, he's offering to wrap his hand around us today. But we have to listen and do our part and strap in. So may God bless you today.
The great plan of God is in process. And we're in the midst of all that, as Brother Jeremy said, but there is the other great plan that the evil one has to divert our attention, to provide distractions, to have all these things happen and take place, to have us lose confidence in the Lord or lose hope in whatever the possibilities could be, and shake our faith a little bit. You sometimes go out and you're going to pursue an objective of some type. And then, I know this happens to you. It doesn't just happen to me, but on your right shoulder is that guardian angel that the Lord puts in your life, right? And it's whispering all the good stuff to you, whispering all the stuff that we know is right to make those choices to follow after God's plan. But then on this left shoulder, you have this little devil that's kind of taking apart everything that you know. And we have this constant battle that goes on in our life every single day. And I know that in your testimonies and in my testimonies, we talk about, I don't know how people in this world can survive without having the Lord in their life. Now, without being able to lean towards that guardian angel that the Lord has put in all of our lives to help us get through the trials and tribulations and opportunities of the day. Jeremy also said, I think he said that the Lord does not want us to stand still. He wants us to continue to move forward in life. And we want to do that, but we've got to move in the right direction. And I'll mention again, and I do so many times, because it makes sense in our lives, that when Lehi and his family were out in the wilderness, not knowing where they were going to go, when they got up in the morning and they opened up the door to their tent, what was out there in the middle of it? This thing called the Liahona, right? And it had these spindles, and it kind of said, it pointed them in the direction that they should go. And what's not said there, but inferred, in the direction that they should go to follow God's plan in their life. And it said it worked, depending upon the faith and the diligence that they employed to that direction that they were getting that day. And Jeremy's point today also is that in so many instances in the Bible and the Book of Mormon, are we told that we can't do it without the protection of the Lord, that armor, that shield of faith, the breastplate of righteousness, all that stuff is part of what helps our faith and diligence to kind of plow through the life that we lead, that's following God's plan. We're blessed. I mean, in spite of the fact that we're part of this world, we're in it, but not of it. So that means that we succumb to the problems of life that are around us. We're not shielded from the COVID. We're not shielded from losing jobs. We're not shielded from illnesses and sicknesses that come our way. We get it too, but we survive because we've got the power of God behind us. and the faith and the diligence that, you know what? He'll get us through this thing. 23rd Psalm of David said, right? Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. He doesn't stop in the middle of the valley of death. He says we're going to get through it because of our faith and our diligence. And we got to thank the Lord for all that. Praise the Lord for that thing. Stephanie, I want to bite that little kid's cheeks.
I do too.
She's a gem. We're going to leave it open for your testimony at this point in time. God bless you.